I want to introduce Daniel Swartz. Daniel lost his job and career in the midst of 2020. He returned with his young family to the farmland he grew up on and restarted with his young family to the farmland he grew up on and restarted in a new to him creative field, letterpress design and printing. He now creates limited edition letterpress prints and speaks to colleges and organizations about the creative journey. Daniel lives with his wife and 2 children in rural northern Indiana, surrounded by corn. Please welcome Daniel Swartz.
All right. Well, thanks. I'm excited to chat with you guys about this today. And thanks for diving in with the Lego printing. That was super fun. I have never done that many people at one time, and it was definitely overwhelming. But I had a good time. I'm glad you did too. So the talk title, at least for now, is A Quiet Hope. And I might change that another time this week, but for now, that's what we're sticking with. So this is my studio. I live in rural northern Indiana. It's about a 10 by 12 space where I spend a lot of time printing with old stuff, right? Doing letterpress design. I'm a big fan of Indiana. I mean, that's where I grew up, and I'm not even close to Indianapolis, but I know Indianapolis is popular and well known, so I do stuff about Indianapolis. But I'm a big fan of things made in the Midwest, and I'm excited to be here with a bunch of other Midwest makers as well, because, let's be honest, the cities, the coasts, they're a little more flashier. They get some more of the attention. They get the tighter networks and all that kind of exciting stuff. But I think there is a lot of great stuff happening in small, humble, quiet spaces, and you don't have to be somewhere big to make something awesome, right? And so I trumpet that a lot on social media. Maybe it's just to make me feel better, but it's also because I want other creators to feel like they can be in humble, less than ideal situations and make something great as well. So a lot of my work, I'm mostly a fine artist, graphic designer, if you want to call me that. A lot of it is targeted at other people that love fonts and color and contrast and printing and other things like that. But I also try to talk about messages and ideas that are larger than that. This is my annual mindfulness calendar project, one of my favorites. So I know it doesn't look like a good calendar, but I promise you it is. It comes with these little stickers, and then every month you get to start a new sticker. You get to put one of those on top of the shapes, and you mark the start of your next 30-day allotment. And it's about thinking, what am I doing with the time God has given me? Am I using this space well? Am I earning the next sticker, right? And I know it seems trivial, but I love putting my stickers on throughout the year and seeing like this visual like progression of the year as it goes on, and multiple sizes. Another thing that I like to do is this Create Without Fear series. It's kind of an annual series now that a lot of elementary school teachers buy and high school teachers, and it goes to college studios as well, because I want to encourage young artists to create with courage and without fear, because I know how it is, especially in the age of social media. You put everything out there and you're instantly judged, right? And a lot of times by people who have no idea what they're talking about. But you get that fear, right? At the very least, you put something up for a critique and people may say things that you don't agree with, or they may be overly harsh, and they may have a different viewpoint, and it can be intimidating to make. But I want to keep moving forward and teach kids to do better, right? Or young creators. This is one of my favorites. This is also for designers, right? If you don't know this concept, every project can have only 2, not all 3. So it can be good and quick, but it's not going to be cheap. It can be quick and cheap, but it's not going to be good, right? And this is not only for our clients to hold them like a little bit responsible in the relationship, but also ourselves. How many of us think we are just superhuman with what we can do, right? If we just work longer hours and work harder and make more, we can actually have all 3. And I don't think that's a healthy way to create, right? I think it's good to have realistic expectations for ourselves and others. Keep going, we all need that, right? Fail forward, yes please, that's the only way you learn. I usually have hymns in my rotation because these are things that are meaningful to me and things that I hum myself throughout the day when I become stressed or dismayed with my kids or whatever. And I also do scripture and things like that. But then there's holidays, right? Because everybody loves the holidays and you have to pay the bills, so that's important too. Valentine's Day, this was a little fun pack I did where you would buy it as a set and then they could rotate them throughout the year as a reminder of your love. I also always love Christmas, and I love the aesthetic and all the colors. It's a meaningful season for us anyhow, right? But let's be honest, the design is so much fun. You don't get to do Christmas stuff any other time of year. So I like doing this kind of thing. And I have those back there as well today too. Here's one of my favorites, and this is one of the things I love about analog printing. You see that? When you overlap the inks, you get these little luster shifts, and it changes things. And when the wood type presses into the paper, it changes the surface. It's like a dimensional printing art, and I love that. You can't get that with like an inkjet printer, right? You can call it a G-Clay, and that's fancy, but it's still an inkjet, all right? This is like tactile. I also do creative partnerships, people I work with to help different causes or different organizations for things that are meaningful to me. So I kind of use my style and my skill to make something. This is for a local state park that I love and not enough people know about. So I made this little branding piece, all printed traditionally, scanned digitally, provided to them, and then they make all kinds of merch out of it. And it's a great little thing that raises the esteem of this humble little park in a quiet place that is doing great things. And that's what I like to spend a lot of my time making stuff for. This is for my church last year, again, traditionally printed, then scanned in layers, provided then digitally for their designers and for video work and all the transitions and all that kind of jazz. And then on occasion, I do wood type for other designers. So if they have a special project, I will print something in wood type and send a scan or whatever, and they can use it on their products. This is something I did for a theater in Tennessee for a buddy, and I printed the type, traditionally and scan it, and now they have this great Antigone, heavy, character-laden text. So this is kind of what I do. I want to show you what I did first, so you have an idea like where I'm coming from. So I'm going to tell you my story a little bit, and it's going to, I think, repeat some of the themes we've heard today, and I think that that's a great thing. I love hearing other creative stories. It's always an encouragement to me to hear what other folks have gone through. And then I'm going to show you some of my process, because everybody always wants to know about process. And then I'm going to try and wrap it up together, okay? So in the beginning, I think like a lot of us, I always thought that life was more organized like a Mondrian painting, maybe than it was a Kandinsky. And I thought that if you follow the rules and you work hard and you go in a straight line and you set your goals and your 10-month plan, your 5-year plan, everything's going to work out great, right? And what I've been discovering is that life is a little more like Kandinsky on the right. It is a different kind of organized. It is a different kind of beauty, but it is good nonetheless. So this is where I grew up. This is my parents' place, which was actually my great-grandparents' place before then, and was wiped out by a set of Palm Sunday tornadoes that did it and kind of tore the place apart. And it was this nice little 2.5, 3 acre place that I could just run around and like be free. And then it was surrounded by another 30 acres that I could explore of farmland. Went down to the creek. You can find turtles and tadpoles and crawdads and do all those things that little boys like to do, right? But let me tell you, there was not a lot going on where I was at, all right? To steal a joke from Seth Godin, if this is nowhere, I was in the middle of it. There is nothing happening. Most of the stuff you see, those are just barns. Don't be tricked into thinking that's anything else than farmland. When I was growing up, we didn't even have a Dollar General. I mean, that's where we were at. But it was good for me, right? I like big, quiet spaces. It's calming. So my early exposure to art was like probably a lot of you is through mass media, right? And so the things that you explore, the things that you're introduced to are like Disney, right? That was like the big thing. And you see I have my Pinocchio poster up there. I loved that movie. It's a great morality tale, but it's a little scary when they get turned into donkeys. But obviously everybody knows Disney, so you want to learn how to draw like that because that's what success is. That's my little sister there. She's fantastic. She's a ballerina. She's creative in her own right. And here's an early drawing because I love seeing artists' early work. I hope you like this as much as I do, but I think I'm rocking it. Look at all the textures. Look at all the colors and the patterns. And I mean, that clown's on a unicycle. And then we obviously have, a brown penguin juggling Sprite bottles. I don't know what's happening. And at the bottom, either that's a bunch of Coke cans, and my dad did drink a lot of Coke growing up. Or I'm guessing it's actually like theater seats in the front of like Looney Tunes. You'd always see those red seats and the heads on top of them, right? And then my early attraction to lettering and fonts and typography. I tell you what, that E, I do not know if I will ever draw an E better than that one. Sometimes you peak early. But another one of my influences was cereal boxes. As as rural and uneducated as that is, you would go to like the Scott's grocery store, right? And it would just be almost like a gallery wall of all of this art for kids. Plus there's toys if you buy it. So that's pretty exciting. But I remember looking at them when I was at home, and I would be so frustrated that I couldn't make lines as smooth as what was on the cereal boxes. I couldn't make gradients that were as nicely applied. Like my Crayola crayons did not do these things. So maybe I was angst-ridden? Yeah, probably. But there is something good about identifying that there's someone that's better than you, right? I mean, that's how you grow. At least recognizing that you're not the best in the room is always a good thing. But this is my big influences, right? As well as Garfield was a huge influence in my world. The guy who made Garfield, Jim Davis, he's like an hour south of me, and he's kind of famous. Actually, in our area now, they have Garfield statues. You can go on a Garfield tour and get like ice cream at one Garfield and like a picture of him playing basketball at another Garfield. Big deal. So that's what I was into. But again, rural America, right? There's not a lot going on, not a lot of culture, not a lot of arts. These were my parents. I'm the squirmy one in that picture, and that's my dad teaching me to mow. That's not a real mower. It's like a Fisher-Price thing, just realistically colored. But they are creative people, but not artistic people. And I so am thankful and admire them for encouraging this little kid that was angst-ridden to keep drawing. And they didn't know what they were doing. And I remember my grandparents used to get upset that like my Christmas present was like a ream of paper and markers. Like that's what I wanted. I didn't need the G.I. Joe aircraft carrier. I wanted to draw. And so they encouraged me by finding a couple resources. These are like the three primary ones. How many of you have seen How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way? Oh my goodness, it's fantastic. Learning how to draw cylinders and characters, and Stan Lee shouting Excalibur, right? And then Mark Kistler on PBS, who was incredibly enthusiastic about drawing and solids and cast shadows and things going through things. And then there was this book called Cartooning the Head and Figure by Jack Ham. He was a master like pen and ink cartoonist, like mid-century America. And you would open this Bible up, and there would be like 200 hands drawn in 200 different styles. And the next page is a bunch of like leg folds, and you pick the one you want there, right? And it was just like this encyclopedia of like how to draw. And he's an absolute master, and has a bunch of other great drawing and painting books, by the way. So this was my art education. Around the corner, across some farmland, lived my grandfather, who I always thought looked a little bit like Andy Griffith. And maybe that's why I like that show so much. But he always saw himself as a creative, and he was. But he was more into like drafting and architecture, and kind of wanted to model himself after Frank Lloyd Wright. So much so that shortly before I was born, he took upon himself to build a hexagonally shaped home in probably one of the most conservative counties ever. And I'm sure it was the talk of the town, or the talk of the cows, whoever was around. But you can see how unique this thing is, right? And I remember going over there to like can vegetable soup with grandma, or help out with the house, or be in the garden with them. And it was such a unique space. Every room is different. Every room has its own character. And I'll tell you what, if you're in a hexagonal home, most of the corners look like this. Some of them are really wide. Every room has like one square corner, and that's where you put a piece of furniture. The rest of it is just like, I don't know what to do with this space. But it was like in a circle, and you could run around, and it was like unique. You never went to another person's house like that. And I always loved that Grandpa designed it and built it himself. Well, eventually I go off to college, and primarily my only experience with art was like drawing with pencils, like colored pencils sometimes, but mostly pencils. And I got to college, and I decided to pursue art, and I was just so overwhelmed. I didn't know what I was getting into. I was a very small fish in a very big pond as far as I was concerned. These other kids, they had like private lessons. They knew things like what acrylic paint was. They'd had words like contrast and hue and texture, and I had like none of this. And it was all foreign to me, and it was all very overwhelming. And the only thing that saved me was like 18 years of drawing with a pencil. Like I could draw, and that was it. Fortunately, along the way, I had a professor pull me aside because I had to take an intro to computer graphics class. And he said, Daniel, you're kind of fast at this computer thing. I think you should try the graphic design degree. And I was not particularly interested in that, but I did not want to be a starving artist, right? Because all growing up, I'd heard this thing about starving artists. Speaking of which, here's my favorite joke about starving artists. Do you know what the difference is between a starving artist and a large pizza? a large pizza can feed a family of 4. Ouch, right? And so, yikes, you grow up hearing these things, and that is not good for your self-esteem. So I thought, well, this could be a good backup plan, right? I was at least smart enough in the moment to say, yes, I should have a backup plan. So I learned on this Bondi Blue Macintosh on Quark Express, and I absolutely despised almost every graphic design class I went to for the next 3.5 years. It was torture. I hated it. But I took the classes, and I didn't get the degree, and I graduated. And then I was a starving artist. And I worked at a coffee shop, because that's a good, familiar story, right? And I learned that it didn't maybe matter how many times I'd watched Stan Lee and John Buscema draw. It didn't matter how well I could hold a pencil. It didn't matter maybe that I even had a piece of paper, right? I had no way of actually making it work. And so our life was becoming kind of messy at this point. Fortunately, I met a curly-haired girl at a coffee shop who caught my eye, that one back there, who now accompanies me to these things. And she encouraged me to leave the coffee shop job and maybe find something better. Fortunately, there was a church that was local that was hiring a part-time graphic designer. And I had those classes that I absolutely hated. And I thought, well, maybe I could do this thing. But I didn't really want to, because I went to the interview and I tried to throw the whole thing. But the executive pastor was more in touch with the Holy Spirit than I was and hired me anyhow. And it was the best 5 years, I think, that I've ever had behind a computer. I learned all kinds of things about how to actually use design. Because before it was all theoretical, and it's just tools, right? And it's just like making a computer do things. Here, you could make something on Monday, and they would use it on Sunday, right? Or you could make something and put it online, and you could see people come to an event. Or you could make something tactile that people could work with, and it would change how they interacted with something. Or you could make a slide that people would say, oh man, I remember that for weeks later. That was an important point in that sermon. And I started seeing how design could change lives. And that was really exciting to me. Now, behind the scenes, I'm still trying to make the illustration work, because I still want those smooth lines, and I love that mid-century vibe. And I got an interview at a game company once, and I went down, I showed them the portfolio, and they loved it. And I go back home, and they call me, and they're like, we want to hire you. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. The doors are opening. I'm finally going to be an illustrator. And he said, well, we have this one project for you. If you want to do it, this is yours. We'll start on Monday. I was like, okay, that sounds great. And then he says, this little line, and he says, and it all needs to be in vector. And I was not entirely sure what that meant when it came to illustration. And I said, probably because I was hungry and I was young, I said, well, sure. And so I spent the weekend cramming my all these lessons. I went to the library and got an Illustrator classroom and a book and tried to teach myself how to do this thing. I had some basics, but I did not know how to translate that into my drawing style and the characters, right? And so I finished a project. The graphic designer was so gracious with me and halfway carried my files across the finish line for me. But I learned and I finished it, and then I ended up doing a bunch more projects for him. And then I started doing more and more vector stuff, and I got this one-man band into Society of Illustrators Los Angeles, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's finally happening. I'm gonna be an illustrator. And you know what happened? Nothing. Nobody cared that I was in this show, but that was okay. It could have been a fluke, so I kept working. And then I got in again. I did this e-reader thing, and I was like, that's it. It wasn't a fluke, and nothing happened again. And I kept going, and I kept getting more work, and I did some magazine covers, some more games. I did some Christian curriculum stuff. I did some other books, and this was all well and good. And then I did an MFA, and I said, well, why am I faking all of these accidents and all this mid-century vibe, right? Because all these illustrators that were originally doing it are working in colored pencil and gouache and airbrush. Why fake it? I'm going to do it for real. So I used part of my MFA to teach myself how to do this kind of thing, and I loved it. Super cool. Got a kid's book with a very small publisher, and this thing here got into Society of Illustrators West again, and I was like, here we go. Open the floodgates. And it never happened. And what I was starting to see over time was, even though maybe I was somewhat good at illustration, I was not good at the business of illustration. There is a difference between being able to make something and being able to market. There's a difference between having skill and then finding people who actually need the thing that you do. And I was really, really bad at this. I was getting work, but it was not a good financial path. Fortunately, I was going into teaching, So that was really good. And I was learning all these things about design, and I was digging deeper into it and order and learning that I could teach it better than how to paint and how to draw. And I was really getting into fonts and typography and all these kinds of exciting things. And I was kind of developing this new career. Anybody know who Sister Karita Kent is, the graphic designer? No? I got to work with her work a little once to do a show. And I was like, everything is like going up. This is my new path. And I thought it was terrific. But then I came back after Christmas break one year for my job. I went to a chapel service, and after the chapel service, my boss calls me aside and says, Daniel, we need to have a talk. And we went to my office, and then he said, we're going to let you go. And then shortly after that, they demolished the entire department. Like, the entire department was dissolved. There was no more art department for me to work for. And this career that I had been working for 14 years, all of a sudden was kaput. 3 degrees, lots of late nights, carpal tunnel syndrome, all the good stuff seemed kind of worthless. And that happened at the end of 2019, which put me at a job hunt in the middle of 2020, which is possibly the worst time to be looking for a job ever. I got a couple interviews. I talked to some very nice people, but none of them were interested in actually bringing me on. And so here I am. I've been doing this thing. It was not going great, but I found a different thing to do, and I thought that that could work, and that it was going great, and all of a sudden that's not working either. So I wasn't entirely sure what to do. I had gotten a small freelance gig from someone I think that just had pity on me, and that's okay, because pity's fine. And I said, we're kind of in lockdown, and I looked at my wife and I said, well, I've got this money. I said, either I think I want to buy a really nice ukulele, or I have this idea to maybe do this like really large format block print. She was not a huge fan of the ukulele idea, maybe because I had recently just bought another one. But I decided to go after this. And so through 2020, the first half of 2020, I bought these linoleum blocks, and I'm carving and I'm cutting, and it's difficult work and it's making me sweat. And I go down to this basement and I'm hand inking this giant thing, and I've never really done a relief print like this before. I'm kind of making it up as I go. But I needed something else to do. And this was like this good physical act that I could do with all this carving and all this printing. And so, fortunately, my wife got a job offer at a school that she was excited about. And fortunately, even more so, it was close to where I grew up. And so we relocated to the middle of nowhere, where there's these beautiful sunrises and beautiful sunsets. And it just so happened that there was a little hexagonal home that had just opened up. So we moved here with all these memories, and I posted this print online on Instagram, and I thought, well, what am I going to sell this for? Let's do $250 a piece. That sounds like a good price for someone that's never sold a print before. And you know what? People bought them, and I couldn't believe it. I don't know if it's because it was 2020 and everybody was stuck in their homes. I don't know if it was pity, but either way, it was hope. It was something that actually worked, because let me tell you what, I was down in the valley. It was hard trying to reconcile what this next season was going to be. And so an old friend, saw on Facebook that I was doing this thing, and he said, he was an old art teacher, and he had a barn full of like art supplies he'd accumulated through his entire career. And he said, if you're interested in doing this letterpress thing, come on out here. I've got a press and a couple drawers of type, and I will let you have them if you'll use them. So I jumped in our minivan, and I raced over there, and I remember I was getting these out of his barn and loaded them up, and I was so embarrassed, because I was thinking about doing this letterpress thing, but I didn't have enough knowledge. I didn't have the vocabulary. I didn't have the experience. I just had like an idea, and it was barely an idea, right? And so I was like sweating, not only from the summer heat, but like I'm taking this guy's stuff who believes in me maybe more than I do, right? And we're going to see what happens. So I get home, and if you follow baseball, things were a little weird in 2020. We didn't have a normal opening day, right? It was delayed until July, and I thought, well, this is something historic. Let's try making a print about that, because I like baseball aesthetics, right? I like watching games. And so I didn't even have a press set up at the time. I didn't even have a studio. Instead, I had a very cheap desk, and I took a cookie tray, and I put it on the desk, and some magnets, and I put the type on there, and I hand-rolled the ink on it. I pressed the paper on, and it was cheap paper from Hobby Lobby, because I did not know what I was doing. And I took these photographs, and I put them on Instagram, and they sold again. And it could have been pity, and it could have just been 2020, but it was that unbelievable thread of hope that I needed to keep going. So now I spend my days, I get these two yahoos out the door in the morning, I make them breakfast and try to get them out with the Chromebooks and the assignments and the fundraisers and whatever else is happening. And then I come home and I pack orders, and some days I bike them down to my post office when it's nice enough out, and then I spend my days setting type and making new things in old ways and running a somewhat small Instagram account where I talk about design and I talk about art history and I talk about my prints, and hopefully I try to give people a little bit of hope along the way. So let me show you how I do this kind of stuff. If you're not familiar with letterpress, how many of you guys know what letterpress is? We got to this is great. This is my people. Good. All right. This is my drawer, type cabinet. Also a gift from some old friends that had a big printery that closed in like the late 90s. And this cabinet sat in their garage for like 20 years waiting for me. And now I have it filled with as much type as I can cram in there. I probably have over 3,000 pieces of wood type in my studio, which sounds like a lot until you actually try to spell words. If I don't have all the letters, I usually go in and I carve something myself. And I'll just point out that little speedball linoleum cutter right there. It's actually from my grandfather. I found that when we were cleaning out the house. So now I carve things with his tools in his space. Everything I try to keep authentic to the original typography and fonts. So I either find specimens online to copy and then I'll transfer those and make linoleum blocks, or you could do a transfer of something that exists, but I try not to do too many new things, but make new things with old stuff. If I don't have something, there's a couple folks that will do this for you. There's a company called Virgin Wood Type, which is my favorite in New York. They bought out the router stencils for a wood type company when it closed in New York. And so now in their little shed, they make new stuff out of old patterns, and it's fantastic. So it's like it just came off the manufacturing line. But it's very much a cottage industry thing, but it's so unbelievably well made. Follow them on Instagram. I also have a laser engraver that I got as part of that grant, and so I can make digital designs and I can burn things out for really detailed or really small things, which is useful. There's some of that. And every project always starts with research, just like you guys. I want to look at vibes, I want to look at type, I want to look at what other visual decision makers are doing along the way and see what I can learn from them. And then mock-ups. And because I know vector, I can do this endlessly, which is fantastic. And my perfectionism can just have a heyday. I have a couple friends that I'll send these to, as well as my wife, who gives me loving guidance about what's working and what's not. And then, hopefully they don't kick me out of the room for this, the software that I use to do this in is Affinity. I know I'm not in Adobe, I'm so sorry. Please don't stop listening to me. This is really good software though. If you need an option for like students or people who are just dabbling, $50 a package. So 50 for vector, 50 for the Photoshop, 50 for the InDesign layout package, and it is really powerful stuff. It'll do almost everything you need. Doesn't do any AI, which I have no problem with, but it does not swap files well with Adobe, so just heads up there. Then we choose paper stock, put it on the press, we choose the pressures, and we make things, right? Everything has to be locked into a grid, and this is something that's kind of an unseen part of the letterpress process. It's not the glamorous part. So the type goes in the middle, and then we use blocks of wood that are carefully cut to size, and then you use these tension things here called coins that expand when you put a key through them, and that introduces lots of pressure. In the old days, the test used to be you make a lockup, and if you could hold it over your head and it didn't fall out and hurt you, you passed the test. I don't do that. I just kind of shimmy it around and make sure it's tight enough, but it has to hold still. There has to be this foundation to it that is really, really solid, and it's all of these things that you actually never see in the prints, right? So this is a lockup. You can see all the wood there. You see the pieces of wood in between? It's called furniture, okay? You may have been in a design class at some point and someone would have told you the white space is just as important as the positive space, right? The negative is just as important as the positive. And in letterpress, that is absolutely true. Because if you don't have this thing down and secured and measured out, stuff is going to wiggle or it's not going to be aligned right. The type only goes where there is not furniture. Does that make sense? So I really rely upon all these little pieces of wood that I cut from square dowel. Some of it's antique, some of it's new. I use little shims, little pieces of paper, little thin pieces of wood to get it all to work. And then underneath, you have to do something called make ready. So type gets damaged over time, or it may have been manufactured by different people, okay? And so what happens is you have different heights. It all has to be 0.918 inches high, which is useless except for the fact that if it's not, nothing prints. So you have this 2, right? And it may be hitting the paper, but the O doesn't. And so what do? You cut a thin piece of paper, you put it under the 0, and you hope that it levels it up. And then you work on all your other characters. Inevitably, what happens is you get 3 of the characters to work, and the 4th one all of a sudden doesn't. And so now there's more paper underneath. And we're talking, some people will use like a single sheet of tissue paper just to elevate it that tiny little bit so it hits correctly. There's all this hidden work that happens in it that nobody sees. It's quiet, it's humble, it's negative space, it's this, right? But this is what facilitates making finished prints. And nobody cares about this really, right? I can't really talk about this on Instagram too much because nobody would like it. But this is essential to what we're doing. And then there's kerning. You guys know what kerning is, right? You got to fit your letters together. It's a little harder. I don't have to hold down Alt, left, right, left, right, left, right, and eyeball it. I make a best guess. I take a saw and I cut here, and then to the sides and hope that puzzle piece fits together. So you got to be really confident in your kerning choices when you're doing this because there is no undo button. And then you shimmy it in again, right? Sometimes you're working with multiple stocks. So like for that indie print, the linoleum is stuff that I carved from 3/4 inch block. The indie is from antique wood block, and the stars are from virgin wood type. So 3 different sources that you have to all make the same height, which is fairly challenging. But honestly, if you go into letterpress, you kind of know what you're getting into. Then we do proofs, and then we do notes, and then we fix it, and then I mix inks, and then I roll it on there mostly by hand. I have one press that's foot pedaled. I can, pedal along and make it work. If colors overlap, it requires 2 passes. Sometimes things will go on multiple stocks to create multiple versions, right? Because you want to make the most of all this work you've put into a layout. If colors are not overlapping, sometimes I can ink them separately. And then I plan for mistakes. I know things are going to happen, so I usually keep a tiny brush with me. And if ink gets in the wrong place, I'll try to paint over it. I'll try to fix it. Here I had a corner of a block that just wasn't printing, so I made a little mask and another ink roller, and I just kind of fill in that space to make it work. But these are all very handmade things, right? So you do your finishing, any deckled edges, any custom trim work, you photograph it, you list it, you order it, and you ship it. And that's what we do, day in and day out. I love it, right? But there's a bunch of stuff that goes into that nobody ever sees. So here's how I want to talk about this. Hope can be quiet. And I think that it is oftentimes the quietest thing. It is not the thing that maybe gets people's attention. It's not what's showy. If you guys have paid attention in your graphic design classes or history classes, Johannes Gutenberg invented movable type printing, by and large. He was a metallurgist. He was not necessarily an artist, but he had this idea that if we cast lots of little letters out of metal, and we put them in a layout, and then we ink it, and we press it on a page, we can start doing printing, okay? And he was basically the first person to come up with this. Now, we were printing beforehand, right? We had presses and things like this, where we would carve an entire book page out of a slab of wood. Now, of course, the whole thing has to be carved backwards, right? Just like we did in the Legos, it has to be backwards. So imagine carving this. This is from what's called the Pauper's Bible, right? So every page, you carve it, you ink it, then you start doing the stamping action, right? But to do the next page, you have to make a new wood block. Gutenberg's model, you just take all those letters, put them back in the drawer, and then realign them, and now you have a new page instantly. You don't lose any resources. You're not limiting yourself. Some of our earliest woodblock printing is the stuff on the right. These are playing cards from Italy, which I am convinced are the predecessor to Pokemon cards. I mean, tell me those aren't Pokeballs, right? But he made this. This is the Gutenberg Bible, and this is what literally launched Western society, right? This is where literature exploded, literacy exploded. If this didn't happen, like, we may not have cell phones in our pockets at this point, right? This changed the world. There was only 180 maybe of his Bibles that were made. And of those 180, we only have 21 that are complete. His life's work, right, his most important thing, there was 180 of them, and we only kept 21, but it changed the world, right? And it changed the world through these tiny little pieces of metal type that honestly on their own meant absolutely nothing, right? But they have been assembled in a way that was meaningful and created something for people. right? Now, to be honest, Gutenberg wasn't the first, right? Asia, the Asian cultures beat us to printing, and they even had movable type printing. They had characters that were carved out individually, or there were some that were cast in Korea, or like the area that is Korea now, from metal, and they did this beautiful artisan stuff. If you've ever looked at like this Japanese printing, they'll have like 7 different color blocks that are all lined up, and they make these beautiful things, right? But Asian printing actually never got out of the country really well, and there's some reasons possibly for that, right? Some people speculate there was too much attention to like the quality of the inks and the quality of the paper and the quality of the image, right? Whereas Gutenberg is kind of, I mean, he becomes a job printer basically after the Gutenberg Bible. He just makes a lot of different things for people. And so because this was a much more elevated craft, we all know that's more expensive, right? And it's hard to make it more profitable. There's also the language situation, right? So I've read for this era, you would have needed about 2,000 different characters to communicate, right? How many do we need in German or English? Like 26, right? 52 if we have capitals. Let's put numbers in there, 70. That's nothing compared, right, to 2,000. So what happens sometimes is our craft can be a distraction. Our craft can get in the way of moving forward, of making a difference with the things that we're doing, right? It's not that craft is bad, but you can't have the highest craft possible for every project you do, right? There are some things that just have to get out the door. There are some things that need to have an elevated craft, and we have to balance that through our career. A lot of what I do in letterpress is managing bits and pieces. It's lots and lots of things. After every project, I got to clean up all the type and put it in the right drawers and match it with the right fonts and get it all in the right place, right? There's all these things that happen along the way, including make ready, including making furniture, stuff that nobody ever sees. And it's the same for most of you, I'm assuming, right? Most of your jobs, the majority of what you probably do is unseen. Nobody cares, for the most part, if you're wrapping cables well. Nobody cares if POs are filed on time, except for the person who receives the POs, right? But your audience doesn't care. That's more of what I'm saying, right? Setting up master pages in InDesign is not necessarily an exciting craft that you're going to post on Instagram. I mean, maybe you are. I'm not, right? So we're in this situation where a lot of what we do as our creative work is unseen. It's unnoticed, it's not flashy, it's not exciting, right? I would go to say that the majority of what we do is only facilitating like the big moments, the exciting things that we get to publish and put out there. There's an author named Oswald Chambers. Who's heard of Oswald Chambers, right? If you haven't read his book, My Almost for His Highest, it's fantastic. He was a pastor, a minister. I think he died at the age of 33 of like tuberculosis, if I remember right. And his wife assembled all of his sermon writings into this book. And they're very short passages about the Christian life, and I think they're fantastic. But one particular that has always stuck with me is the idea that the Christian life is lived both in the valley and in the mountain. And that there are absolutely high moments, right? Like after church camp, right? Or after a good sermon, or after a good missions trip or whatever, right? Or you've done something well in your community. But those high points, those don't last forever. The majority of what's happening is kind of lower, it's mundane, it's quiet, it's unseen, but it's absolutely essential to the path. 2020 taught me a lot about that. There's a difference between reading about something and living about something, right? There's a different empathy that comes about. I had this job, which I absolutely loved, and it kept me very busy, and it made me feel very important, and I was very needed in a lot of different regards, right? And all of a sudden, I went from like 100 miles per hour to like 5 miles per hour. I moved from a city back to the country. I went from busy to not busy. I went from the guy that was working to the stay-at-home dad. Like everything possible shifted in like a matter of months. And I was kind of struck by the different ways that I was thinking about my career and my work before then and how I was seeing it afterwards. I was noticing that even though maybe my reach was farther, like on social media, and more people were seeing my things, that I had lost something. There was a spark that was completely gone. And I think what it was, and I think what it is it's the connections. It's the networking, right? Because some work on its own is kind of hollow. If work doesn't affect the world around you, if it doesn't touch lives, in some ways, what are we doing, right? And so I saw myself without the connections, all that's gone. It felt very empty. And I started realizing in much more real ways, and I believed this beforehand, I just believe it more deeply now, that the positions we're put in now, that is a unique intersection that is just for you, of the time, the people, and the place that God has granted you for a very short season. And it needs to be used well. But what strikes me even more so, right? More so than the rare opportunity of like touching lives and like being with people and showing them the love of God, is the fact that I'm not the only one that has mountaintops and valleys, right? Everybody I interact with is doing the exact same thing. And if the majority of my life is kind of down here, waiting for those mountaintop experiences to like help me coast through the next valley, they're doing the same thing, right? They're living the exact same life. Everybody needs hope. This here was crazy, but people gave me hope. And I think they had to sacrifice some things to do that along the way. And I am so incredibly grateful for that. Here's what I'd like to propose to you, that we are in a unique position to give people hope, and we are in a unique position to show people the love of Christ. It has struck me that every time someone comes to us to make something for them, it's because they can't do it themselves, right? They don't know how to use InDesign, so they need us to lay out the brochure. They have no idea how to put clips of film together outside of on their phone, so they need us to do it for them, right? They don't understand color and texture and pattern, but they need us to do it for them. And what we don't see is the backstory, right? This friend, this person, this may have had an idea, a dream of doing a bakery for 12 years, right? And it's always been a dream. And in a moment, they have decided to turn it from a dream into something bigger, and they come to you. And that is weighty stuff, I think, right? Because you have the ability to unlock their dreams, right? To give them hope, to do big things. And I think that's something we should carry preciously, right? And sometimes I think it can give us more compassion for the people we work for, because it helps us understand why the stakes are so high for them. We don't know how long they've been waiting for this moment. We don't know how important it is to them. Somebody I was talking with earlier today was talking about working with churches, and sometimes the budgets are so tight, it makes things more, it raises the stakes because they don't want to lose this opportunity. It's the same for a lot of the people we make stuff for, right? This is their chance. We are in a unique position to be hope givers because we can do really cool stuff. If I can brag on us, we make really cool stuff, right? And it is a chance to give people hope and open huge new doors. And beyond financial, beyond careers, beyond jobs, beyond influence, right? We are in a position to show them Christ. We can be compassionate, we can be faithful, we can be forgiving, we can be hands and feet in those difficult moments, right? Because we know clients are hard to work with. We know customers can be unpleasant sometimes, right? But there's a chance for us to show love and joy and faithfulness, forgiveness and mercy and hope in new ways. All right. Let me talk about this guy really fast. Anybody ever heard of Brother Lawrence? There's a great book about him called The Practice of the Presence of God. You can find it on Amazon, and I know it's a very good book because it sells for next to nothing. And usually the best books sell for next to nothing. I recommend you to read it. It's a third-party record of his life as a monk. So he was born into a very poor family and ended up joining the army during the 30 Years' War and served during that time. And during this time, he became lame during a German occupation, I think, and some really horrible things happened to him. And at the age of 26, he ended up joining a monastery and kind of recommitting his life to a life of solitude, a life of devotion to God. And he used to work with the kitchen and with the winemaking, whatever. And one of the stories that I remember is he was so damaged in his legs that he would have to roll himself over the wine barrels in the boat in order to fulfill his role, right? So he was dedicated to God, but dedicated to doing great work at the same time. And there's one passage that I absolutely love. And I'm not a fan of reading long slides, but I'm going to read this one. And this is talking about Brother Lawrence. And it was observed that in the greatest hurry of business in the kitchen, he still preserved his recollection and heavenly mindedness. He was neither hasty nor loitering, but did each thing in its season with an even, uninterrupted composure and the tranquility of spirit. And this is a quote from him. The time of business, he said, does not with me differ from the time of prayer. And in the noise and clutter of my kitchen, while several persons are at the same time calling for different things, I possess God in as great a tranquility as if I were upon my knees at the Blessed Sacrament. I love that idea, right? In some ways, our jobs can be like a crazy, chaotic kitchen. Everything is clamoring, notifications, emails, deadlines, budgets, clients, customers, right? It can be really, really crazy town. But I think that not only can our relationship with our customers and our clients be redeemed and be a time we can show people hope and joy, but it can be something that we can also dedicate to God and can be useful then, right? That our work can be a sacrament and a sacrifice to Him. So I would just encourage you to think maybe about the relationships and the unique intersection you have now in this time. Think about it a little differently, right? I know it's easy to get wrapped up in deadlines and doing cool stuff, but try to pause and see people that are living in valleys and mountaintops and try to show them the love of God. Try to show them the fruits of the Spirit, because this is a unique opportunity for all of us. All right, that's A Quiet Hope. Thank you. Follow me online.
Thank you so much. Why don't you come on over here for a second? Got a couple questions that have come in, and just wanted to ask you a couple. First off, I'm going to put you on the spot for just a second. All right.
All right.
So we have some things that you may have heard your grandma say, or other people say. You know, that we've always kind of wondered what it means. Do you know what it means to mind your P's and Q's?
Yes,
Yeah.
I do.
Tell people what minding your P's and Q's is.
Okay, so we all did the letterpress printing today, right? You know how you've got to print everything backwards? All right, that can get really confusing. P's and Q's look very similar when they actually are cast or carved backwards. So making sure they're put in the right drawer so when you pull them out to spell things, they're the right letter.
Yeah, so next time someone says mind your P's and Q's, right? I don't know anyone that says that anymore still, but my grandma used to say that. And usually it meant like mind your business, mind your own business, you know? Well, okay, one more of those.
Okay.
So tell me about uppercase and lowercase.
Yeah, okay, so in a printer's cabinet, like in a studio in the old days, you used to actually have two cases. So there was a cabinet with type in it, and then there was a tray here, and there was a tray here. Your uppercase is where the large letters went. Your lowercase is where the lowercase went. So they actually had a different physical position.
Yeah. So just a little bit of mind-blowing information there for you. That's right. So just a couple questions for you. You mentioned finding hope with small steps. Mm-hmm. So what advice would you have for someone who's trying to figure out what their next step might be?
I would say most of the time, what's stopping you from taking the step anyhow? Because if it's a small step, it's not going to cost you much, and there's not much risk in time or finances or embarrassment. So just do the thing and see if it is actually the direction you feel like you should go in then, right? You're going to learn so much, even if that's not the right direction. You're going to say, well, that doesn't work for me. I don't like that. And so you're not going to do it again, and that's also a valuable lesson, right? Just remove those high stakes and those fears and just start doing the thing in the direction you think might work.
Yeah, like what's the worst that could happen?
Yeah.
Right?
Just don't post it on Instagram.
There you go. Or maybe do. Maybe do. I have a friend whose name is Bob Ewing. I don't know if many of you know Bob. He's an amazing letterer out of Indianapolis, and he started doing these, was it 356 days of type? And he basically drew a word, and he wanted to get into lettering. And if you look back at the first word that he did in that, it's horrible. So maybe do post the worst stuff that you do. It allows other people to kind of see the journey you're on, and it actually allows you to look back and see, where you're able to come from.
Yes.
So you mentioned not loving AI. What's your take on AI in general?
Oh boy. I think maybe at a foundational level, I am concerned about AI removing even more respect for artists and for people that are creatively minded. Because I think we already had an issue when computers entered the chat, that we could just quickly design things, right? And that it was effortless, and there was a special button for layout, and you just do that, and it makes a brochure. And so you stop respecting the public, loses respect for our craft. And every time something else becomes automated, it's one more reason for them not to respect what we do, right? And I think there's so much more to be gained from the act of creativity
outside of just the end result. There's a lot of things we learn about ourselves and about the craft and the project and our scope and our future and our relation to art history and all these kinds of things that happen when we are doing the hard work and sweating through a project. If it's just handed to us, you lose so much of, being human, right? Of growing and failing and learning and then coming out on the other side of a project different.
I like that answer. Not that it matters. So one more. So if someone would maybe inspired by what I'm sure everybody here was inspired by your talk today, but if someone was specifically interested in maybe getting started or dabbling in printmaking, where would you recommend they start?
Linoleum block printing is really, really affordable. You can get blocks on like Dick Blick and a set of tools and a little bit of cheap ink, and for like $50 you can start making things, If you want to start letterpress, a lot of studios have open studio nights or Saturday workshops and that kind of stuff, and you can go in and use all their assets without buying a press or your own type, and you can test it out and see if it's something you like and get your hands dirty and make relationships. And those are fairly low cost most of the time too, but just start doing it.
Yeah. If you get into linoleum block, make sure you get one of those.
Oh yeah, the bench.
The bench pieces. I've gouged my thumb so many times doing that. Don't follow my lead on that. So we just wanted to say thank you for sharing your time with us today. Everyone,
Thanks.